Good evening, and welcome to this special in-depth report. Today we're covering a significant diplomatic development that emerged just hours ago from West Africa, one that has serious implications for US-Africa relations and represents a dramatic shift in how African nations are responding to American foreign policy. Mali and Burkina Faso have officially announced travel restrictions on American nationals. This isn't just another diplomatic protest or a strongly worded statement. This is concrete action. A direct tit-for-tat response to President Donald Trump's expanded travel ban that included both countries on a no-entry list earlier this month. According to statements issued by both countries' foreign ministries, statements that were seen and confirmed by AFP news agency on Wednesday, December 31st. Both nations are imposing what they call equivalent measures on US citizens. Let me be clear about what this means. American citizens now face the same entry restrictions when trying to visit Mali or Burkina Faso that Malian and Burkinabe citizens face when trying to enter the United States. The timing here is crucial. These announcements come just 2 weeks after President Trump expanded his travel ban to include nearly 40 countries. That's right, 40 countries whose nationals now face severe restrictions or outright bans on entering the United States based solely on their nationality. This isn't Trump's first travel ban. We've seen this playbook before. But the scale and scope of this latest expansion, and now the coordinated response from African nations, represents something new in the complex relationship between the United States and the African continent. Engaging. So buckle in, because over the next 30 minutes we're going to break down every aspect of this story. What exactly Trump's travel ban entails, why these two West African nations responded the way they did, what this means for ordinary citizens on both sides, and what this tells us about the changing dynamics of international relations in 2025 and beyond. To understand why Mali and Burkina Faso took this unprecedented step, we first need to examine the policy they're responding to. On December 17, 2025, President Donald Trump announced a massive expansion of his travel ban policy. This marks the third iteration of such bans during his presidency, but this one is by far the most sweeping. The new ban affects nationals from nearly 40 countries. That's not a typo, 40 countries. Among them are some of the world's poorest nations, particularly in Africa. The list includes Syrian citizens, Palestinian Authority passport holders, and nationals from several African countries: Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, South Sudan, and Sierra Leone, all face full entry restrictions. But it doesn't stop there. The ban also imposes partial travel restrictions on citizens of other African nations, including Nigeria, which happens to be Africa's most populous country, as well as Ivory Coast and Senegal. This is particularly awkward timing for Senegal, which has qualified for next year's FIFA World Cup, set to be hosted by the United States, Canada, and Mexico. Imagine being a Senegalese football fan hoping to cheer for your national team on American soil, only to find out you might not be able to get a visa. The White House justified these restrictions with a blanket statement that they were banning foreigners who intend to threaten Americans. It's worth pausing on that language for a moment. Intend to threaten is extraordinarily vague. It doesn't specify actual threats, proven connections to terrorist organizations, or specific security incidents. It's a catch-all phrase that essentially paints millions of people from these 40 countries with the same broad brush. The basis for these bans: nationality. Pure and simple. Not individual background checks, not specific security concerns about particular individuals, but simply where you happen to be born or what passport you carry. Concerned, this approach has drawn criticism from civil rights organizations, immigration advocates, and now, as we're seeing, affected governments themselves. Critics argue that blanket bans based on nationality are discriminatory, ineffective as security measures, and damage America's relationships with countries whose cooperation the US actually needs on various issues, from counterterrorism to trade to climate change. It's also worth noting what the Trump administration didn't do. They didn't consult with these countries before imposing the ban. Mali's foreign ministry specifically voiced their regret that the United States made such an important decision without the slightest prior consultation. In diplomatic terms, that's a fairly strong rebuke. It suggests a complete breakdown in the normal channels of communication that usually precede major policy shifts affecting bilateral relations. Think about what this means practically. If you're a Malian student who was accepted to an American university, your educational dreams just hit a brick wall. If you're a Burkinabe business person with contracts in the United States, you can't travel to fulfill those contracts. If you're a Nigerian with family in America, visiting them just became exponentially harder, if not impossible. These aren't hypothetical scenarios. These are real situations affecting real people. The travel ban doesn't distinguish between a terrorist and a grandmother wanting to visit her grandchildren, between a student pursuing education and a security threat, between a business entrepreneur and someone with malicious intent. And now, Mali and Burkina Faso are saying, if that's how you're going to treat our citizens, we'll treat yours the same way. Let's dive into the specifics of how each country has responded, starting with Mali. Mali's foreign ministry issued a statement that was both measured and firm, diplomatic in language but unambiguous in action. The statement said that Mali would, with immediate effect, apply the same conditions and requirements on American nationals that the American authorities have imposed on Malian citizens entering the United States. With immediate effect, those three words are significant. This isn't a threat of future action or a negotiating position. As of the moment that statement was released, the policy is in force. American citizens planning trips to Mali need to understand that the rules have changed overnight. What exactly does this mean? It means that whatever hoops Malian citizens have to jump through to get into the United States, or can't jump through because they're simply banned, American citizens now face equivalent barriers entering Mali. The statement goes further, expressing Mali's regret that the United States made such a significant decision without any prior consultation. In diplomatic language, expressing regret is more serious than it might sound in everyday conversation. It's a formal expression of disappointment and displeasure with another country's conduct. The lack of consultation is particularly galling from Mali's perspective. Despite their strained relationship in recent years, Mali and the United States have had a long history of diplomatic engagement. The US has provided aid, supported counterterrorism efforts, and maintained various forms of cooperation with Mali for decades. To impose a travel ban without even a courtesy heads up to the Malian government suggests a level of disregard that clearly didn't sit well in Bamako. Mali is currently led by a military junta under Colonel Assimi Goïta, who took power in a 2020 coup. The relationship between Mali's military government and Western powers, including the United States, has been deteriorating for several years. Mali has expelled French troops, turned increasingly toward Russia for security cooperation, and withdrawn from regional organizations like ECOWAS. Thoughtful, but even given that context, Mali maintained diplomatic relations with the United States. There were still American diplomats in Bamako, still some level of engagement, still recognition that despite political differences, maintaining some relationship was in both countries' interests. This travel ban, and now Mali's reciprocal response, represents a further deterioration of that relationship. It's Mali saying, we may be a poor country, we may be politically isolated by some Western nations, but we're still a sovereign state, and we expect to be treated as such. The principle Mali is invoking here is reciprocity, one of the foundational concepts of international relations. If you treat our people a certain way, we'll treat your people the same way. It's a principle recognized in international law, enshrined in various treaties, and generally accepted as a legitimate tool of diplomatic expression. Mali isn't breaking new ground by invoking reciprocity. They're using a well-established diplomatic practice. What's notable is that they're willing to use it even though it might further damage their relationship with the world's most powerful country. Professional Burkina Faso, Mali's neighbor and close ally, issued its own statement, announcing virtually identical measures. Burkina Faso's foreign ministry said it was applying equivalent visa measures on Americans. The language is slightly different from Mali's, equivalent visa measures rather than same conditions and requirements, but the practical effect is the same. American citizens now face restrictions entering Burkina Faso that mirror the restrictions Burkinabe citizens face entering the United States. Burkina Faso is led by Captain Ibrahim Traoré, who came to power in a September 2022 coup. He's one of Africa's youngest heads of state and has positioned himself as a pan-African nationalist, often using rhetoric critical of Western influence in Africa and emphasizing Burkina Faso's sovereignty and dignity. Under Traoré's leadership, Burkina Faso has followed a similar path to Mali, expelling French forces, deepening ties with Russia, withdrawing from regional organizations, and generally adopting a more confrontational stance toward Western powers. Just last week, on December 23rd, Captain Traoré became the new chairman of the Alliance of Sahel States, or AES, a confederation formed by Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, after they withdrew from ECOWAS.
This alliance represents a deliberate attempt by these three countries to chart their own course, independent of what they view as Western-dominated regional structures. The timing of Burkina Faso's announcement, coming under Traoré's new chairmanship of the AES, suggests this may have been a coordinated decision among the alliance members. While Niger hasn't officially announced reciprocal measures yet, sources have indicated that such measures have been decided and may be announced soon. Observant, what's particularly interesting about Burkina Faso's statement is what it doesn't say. It doesn't include the explicit expression of regret that Mali's statement contained. Direct. It's more straightforward. You did this, so we're doing this. That difference in tone might reflect Traoré's more confrontational style, or it might simply be a difference in diplomatic drafting, but it suggests Burkina Faso is perhaps even less concerned than Mali about maintaining the appearance of cordial relations with Washington. Like Mali, Burkina Faso faces severe security challenges, including ongoing insurgencies and terrorism. The country has experienced multiple coups in recent years, reflecting political instability and security pressures. Despite this, or perhaps because of it, Burkina Faso is willing to take a diplomatic stand that might complicate its international relationships. Both countries' responses reflect a calculation. The symbolic value of asserting their sovereignty and demanding equal treatment outweighs any potential downsides from further alienating the United States. While Mali and Burkina Faso have formally announced their reciprocal measures, attention is now turning to other affected countries, particularly Niger, the third member of the Alliance of Sahel States. Niger hasn't officially announced countermeasures to the U.S. travel ban yet, but according to Niger's news agency, citing a diplomatic source, such measures have been decided. The report came out last week, suggesting that an official announcement may be imminent. If Niger does announce reciprocal restrictions, and it seems likely given its close alliance with Mali and Burkina Faso, that would complete a unified response from the entire AES confederation. That unity would send a powerful message. These three countries are truly acting as a bloc, coordinating their foreign policy responses, and standing together in the face of what they view as unjust treatment. But what about other African countries affected by Trump's travel ban? The responses have been more varied. Nigeria, Africa's most populous nation and largest economy, faces partial travel restrictions under Trump's ban. Nigerian officials have expressed disappointment and concern about the policy, but as of now Nigeria hasn't announced reciprocal restrictions on American citizens. Thoughtful, given Nigeria's size, economic importance, and the substantial Nigerian diaspora in the United States, the calculation for Nigeria is different than for Mali or Burkina Faso. Nigeria has more leverage in some ways. It's a major oil producer, a significant trading partner, and a key player in regional security efforts. But it also has more to lose from a complete breakdown in relations with the United States. Nigerian officials have indicated they'll pursue diplomatic channels to address the issue, which is code for, we're unhappy, but we're not ready to escalate to reciprocal measures. Ivory Coast and Senegal, which face partial restrictions, similarly haven't announced reciprocal bans. Senegal's situation is particularly delicate given that they've qualified for the World Cup, which will be held partially in the United States. Senegalese officials are likely weighing how to express their displeasure without completely burning bridges with a country that will be hosting their national team next year. Sierra Leone and South Sudan, which like Mali and Burkina Faso face full entry restrictions, also haven't announced reciprocal measures yet. South Sudan is dealing with ongoing internal conflicts and economic crisis, which may limit its diplomatic bandwidth for responding. Sierra Leone has a history of relatively close ties with Western nations, including the U.S., which may make them more hesitant to escalate. The varied responses from different African countries highlight an important reality. There's no monolithic African response to Trump's travel ban. Each country is making its own calculation based on its specific circumstances, relationships, and strategic interests. But there's also an emerging pattern. Countries that have already broken from traditional Western partnerships, like Mali, Burkina Faso, and potentially Niger, are more willing to take reciprocal action. They've already paid much of the diplomatic cost of distancing themselves from the West, so they have less to lose from further confrontation. Let's take a step back and discuss the diplomatic principle that Mali and Burkina Faso are invoking: reciprocity. This is a fundamental concept in international relations and international law, and understanding it is crucial to understanding why these countries responded the way they did. Reciprocity, in simple terms, means treating other countries' nationals the same way they treat yours. It's the international relations version of do unto others as they do unto you. The principle is recognized in numerous international treaties and conventions, most notably the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, which establishes that states should treat each other's diplomats and citizens according to reciprocal principles. The logic behind reciprocity is straightforward. If every country can impose whatever restrictions it wants on foreign nationals without consequence, there's no incentive for countries to treat each other's citizens fairly. Reciprocity creates a kind of mutual accountability. It says,
If you want your citizens treated well when they visit our country, you need to treat our citizens well when they visit yours. Throughout history, reciprocity has been used as a diplomatic tool countless times. During the Cold War, travel restrictions were common, with both Western and Eastern Bloc countries implementing various bans and requiring complex visa processes. When one side tightened restrictions, the other side often responded in kind. More recently, we've seen reciprocity in action in various contexts. When the European Union imposed visa requirements on U.S. citizens for certain territories, the United States considered reciprocal measures. When Russia and Western countries got into diplomatic disputes, they expelled each other's diplomats in tit-for-tat expulsions. That's reciprocity in action. What makes the current situation somewhat unusual isn't the use of reciprocity itself, that's standard diplomatic practice. What's unusual is seeing relatively smaller African nations invoking reciprocity against the United States, one of the world's most powerful countries. Traditionally, smaller or less economically powerful countries often accepted policies from major powers that they didn't like, perhaps lodging diplomatic protests, but rarely taking concrete reciprocal action. The calculation was simple: we need the United States more than they need us, so escalating the situation isn't in our interest. What Mali and Burkina Faso are demonstrating is a different calculation. Asserting our sovereignty and demanding equal treatment is worth the risk of further damaging our relationship with the United States. They're saying, we may be poor, we may be small, but we're sovereign nations, and we won't accept being treated as second-class members of the international community. From a legal perspective, both the U.S. travel ban and the reciprocal measures by Mali and Burkina Faso are generally within each country's sovereign rights. Countries have broad authority to determine who can enter their territory. While various human rights conventions protect the right to leave one's own country, there's no universal right to enter another country. So both sides are acting within their legal rights. The question isn't really about legality, it's about wisdom, fairness, and the kind of international order we want to see. This isn't the first time we've seen African countries take reciprocal action against U.S. travel policies. In fact, earlier this year, Chad set a precedent that Mali and Burkina Faso are now following. When the United States imposed restrictions on Chadian nationals, Chad's president Mohamed Idriss Déby Itno responded by suspending visas for U.S. citizens. Déby framed his decision in terms of national dignity, making a statement that resonated across many African nations. Chad may lack wealth or influence compared to major powers like the United States, but it will not accept unequal treatment. That phrase, national dignity, is important. It reflects a growing sentiment among African leaders that sovereignty isn't just about having a seat at the United Nations or a flag and an anthem. It's about being treated as equals in the international community, about having your concerns taken seriously, and about not being subjected to policies you had no say in formulating. Chad's actions set a precedent, and now Mali and Burkina Faso are following it. If Niger joins them, and potentially other affected countries, we could be seeing the emergence of a broader pattern. African nations are increasingly willing to use reciprocity as a tool to push back against policies they view as unfair or discriminatory. This represents a significant shift from historical patterns. During the colonial era, and for decades afterward, African countries had limited agency in international relations. They were often subjects of others' policies rather than active shapers of the international order. Even after independence, the power imbalance between African nations and major Western powers meant that African countries often had to accept policies they didn't like. What we're seeing now is different. Yes, these are still relatively poor countries with limited global influence. But they're demonstrating that they have agency and are willing to use it, even when it might come at some cost. It's also worth noting that these reciprocal measures are coming from military-led governments. Some observers might be tempted to dismiss them as the actions of undemocratic regimes. But that would be missing the point. Whether these governments came to power through coups or elections, they're invoking principles: sovereignty, reciprocity, equal treatment, that are widely accepted in international relations. Analytical. The fact that military governments are more willing to take confrontational stances toward Western powers may say more about the constraints democratically elected leaders face than about the legitimacy of the principle they're invoking. To truly understand what's happening with these reciprocal travel bans, we need to zoom out and look at the bigger picture, the Alliance of Sahel States, and the broader geopolitical realignment happening in West Africa. The Alliance of Sahel States, or AES, was formed by Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, after all three withdrew from ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States. ECOWAS has been the primary regional organization in West Africa for decades, promoting economic integration, mediating conflicts, and coordinating policy among member states. But these three countries felt that ECOWAS wasn't serving their interests, or worse, that it was serving as a tool for Western influence in the region. After their military coups, ECOWAS imposed sanctions and pushed for returns to civilian rule. The military leaders in these countries viewed this as interference in their internal affairs, driven partly by Western pressure, so they left ECOWAS and formed their own alliance. This wasn't just a symbolic move, it represents a deliberate choice to chart an independent course, to create their own regional structure that reflects their interests and values, rather than those imposed by others. Just last week, Captain Traoré of Burkina Faso became the new chairman of the AES, taking over from Mali's Assimi Goïta. The coordinated announcement of travel restrictions so soon after Traoré assumed this role suggests that the AES may be functioning as more than just a name. It may be coordinating actual policy responses among its members. These three countries have also been strengthening ties with Russia. After expelling French forces, both Mali and Burkina Faso have welcomed Russian military cooperation, including partnerships with Russian private military companies. This has raised alarms in Western capitals, where officials worry about Russian influence expanding in a strategically important region. In September 2025, all three AES members announced their withdrawal from the International Criminal Court, alleging that the ICC operates as a tool of neocolonialism and practices selective justice. That language, neocolonialism, selective justice, reflects a narrative that's gaining traction, that international institutions, supposedly governed by universal rules, are actually dominated by Western powers and used to advance Western interests. Thoughtful you agree with that narrative or not, it's important to understand that it's shaping these countries' foreign policy decisions. They're not just reacting to specific policies like Trump's travel ban. They're operating from a broader worldview that questions the existing international order and seeks to create alternative structures. The reciprocal travel bans fit into this larger pattern. They're not just about visas. They're about asserting a different vision of how international relations should work. A vision where smaller countries aren't simply expected to accept whatever major powers decide, where sovereignty means something real, where reciprocity and mutual respect are enforced rather than just aspirational principles. Behind all the diplomatic statements, geopolitical analysis, and discussions of international law, we need to remember that these policies affect real people. Let's talk about the human impact of these travel restrictions. For Malian and Burkinabe citizens, the U.S. travel ban means that life plans get upended. Students accepted to American universities can't pursue their education. Business people with contracts in the United States can't travel to fulfill them. Family members can't visit relatives living in America. People seeking medical treatment unavailable in their home countries lose access to American hospitals. These aren't abstract consequences, they're devastating personal impacts. Imagine being a brilliant student from Bamako, who earned a full scholarship to an American university, only to be told you can't enter the country because of your nationality. Or being a business owner, who built relationships with American partners over years, only to have those partnerships collapse because you can no longer travel to meet in person. Now, with Mali and Burkina Faso's reciprocal measures, American citizens face similar restrictions in the other direction. While the absolute numbers of Americans traveling to Mali and Burkina Faso are smaller than the number of Malians and Burkinabes hoping to visit the U.S., the impact on those affected is no less real. American aid workers who've dedicated their careers to improving health outcomes, education, or economic development in the Sahel region suddenly can't access their work sites. Journalists covering the ongoing conflicts and humanitarian crises in these countries lose access to the field. Researchers studying everything from climate change to public health to archaeology find their work disrupted. There are also Americans with personal connections to these countries, people who married Malian or Burkinabe partners, who adopted children from these nations, who formed deep friendships during Peace Corps service or other extended stays. For them, these travel restrictions cut them off from people and places that are part of their lives. Diaspora communities on both sides are particularly affected. There are Malian and Burkinabe communities in cities across the United States, people who left home for education or economic opportunities, but maintain strong ties to family and culture. These travel restrictions make it exponentially harder to maintain those connections, to visit aging parents, to attend weddings or funerals, to simply be present for important family moments. Similarly, there are Americans living in Mali and Burkina Faso, diplomats, long-term aid workers, business people, missionaries, and others who've made their lives there. The reciprocal restrictions create uncertainty about their ability to return home for visits or emergencies. It's also worth considering the broader chilling effect these restrictions create. Even people who might have exceptions, or could potentially still travel, face uncertainty, additional bureaucratic hurdles, and the stress of not knowing whether their plans will actually work out. This uncertainty itself has impacts. People delay medical treatment, postpone education, cancel business ventures,
all because they can't be sure they'll actually be able to travel.